Okay, so I'm going to talk about an idea which we developed with Bureau for some time now, about how they actually go across the river, because it's a really interesting story of there's a lot of infrastructure, there's DLR, there's a lot of other things which have been developed in London, but at some point we are pedestrians and we're trying to cross, and we can't do that. It actually takes a lot of time and effort for us. And I'll start with some of the statistics, as some of the other people before, but London is growing quite significantly. London is growing quite significantly, and we're growing the size of Birmingham every 10 years. So it's a quite significant amount of people who are going to be living, and there's a lot of projects which we're doing currently to redevelop. A lot of mixed-use potential is happening in East London, and there'll be 1 million new jobs. So proximity to jobs, being able to walk to work, being able to live where you are is something which is really, really, really important, we think. And half of that growth will be in East London. That's, we think, more than 1 million people, additional people, which will be living in that part of the world. But of course, there's challenges, and I think what we're trying to say is that the greatest challenge we have is actually connecting people, walking, getting there, living and working in the same place. So a true mixed community, mixed-use community be developed around walking. And it's interesting if you look at these diagrams, because the East London's accessibility to jobs is actually relatively poor. If you're in Woolwich trying to get to Newham, it takes you probably about half an hour using different modes of public transport. There is, of course, the ferry, but it's not very easy to do that. So what we're saying is there's other ways, and which are very cost efficient, to actually create these linkages between different parts of London, which historically never had to do that, of course, because it used to be industrial, so there's no real need to go to Woolwich to Newham or Greenwich to the Isle of Dogs. And we need to transform these London places by investing in the quality of life. So, and that quality of life is about people. It's about people walking. It's about cycling. It's more than just the large-scale infrastructure or train stations or anything like that. But it's at a very human level. This is part of our earlier studies for Thames Estuary parklands. We were promoting the ecologically driven, but parkland-driven regeneration of the area, and it's something which we're very passionate still, because we think landscape can come first, buildings come later. But what we have now, a lot of these areas, we have the empty docks, and in East London, the river and its docks were once full of ships, of course. It was the heart of industry, and of course they went down, and they used to be thriving with activity, but now most of them are empty, and the activity has moved elsewhere. And as we saw from the previous speakers, there's there's other places which thrive for this development. So how do we regenerate London? And the London Development Agency, which doesn't exist anymore, is the GLA who took over. They are actually promoting the development of this area big time. And we worked a few years back on the regeneration of we did a master plan for Greenwich, and we did the first commercial buildings there, but then again for a few years everything stalled. It's picking up again, but we have been in the area for quite a while now, and it's a really interesting and emerging place. We were just looking through the window before the talk, and 10 years ago half of the buildings which you see from the window just didn't exist. And it's all kind of looks haphazard, but actually there is something happening which is moving everything forward. And of course, moving further is, it was mentioned earlier, the Royal Albert of the Asian Business Park, which we are currently working on, hopefully going to site by the end of the year. Again, fantastic infrastructure. There's airport, there's DLR, there's roads, but I think that the human scale is something which we need to look at. And the unique location, of course, in close proximity, allows the creation of a new business corridor for London. This is one of our projects I'm just showing you. So there's lots of other projects around like that, but what I think is needed is to somehow stitch them together on a slightly different level of kind of human connectivity. And of course, if you create these new mixed communities, this is again some of these commercial buildings which are going to happen, looking on the history of the site, and building on the great connectivity, as I said, DLR, you can see the airplane in the back of the picture, bridges. So all this is happening, but what we are actually trying to suggest is that, and huge regeneration potential in these areas. I mean, we have 35 acres of brownfield site on this particular project. We are opening, but there's a lot of public realm, opening the promenade, which had never been opened before. We're actually doing a real mixed-use development in this case. It was enterprise zone, commercial only, but we are doing some residential there as well, and a lot of open space and landscape. But all this park, this regeneration suffers, we believe, in some sort of a poor pedestrian connectivity across the area. If you look at this drawing, effectively you can't go south of the river unless you take the ferry, or you go up or use the cable car, which you see through the window. So what we're thinking is that there's another way of doing that, much cheaper, more cost-effective way than doing big tunnels or big road bridges. So the premise is that there are 34 bridges across the Thames, but only one is the Tower Bridge, which is amazing. I mean, there's lots of reasons for that. There's a lot of industry before the river gets much wider and much more tidal, away, especially closer and away from the Thames barrier. So it's a much more complicated technical challenge. But this is and it's a legacy of the London's maritime history, when the river traffic was at its peak and the docks was driving. But this is gone now. But what we're trying to say is that the river is like a highway. So if we start developing more around existing streets, then we obviously need more pedestrian crossings. So what we're saying, the river, as it gets more urban around it with all these new redevelopments, we need more crossings. And there's this interesting analogy. The river now is a bit like an empty highway, because it used to be full of traffic, lots of boats going around. Now there's less boats. So why not try to cross more? And there's a lot of these schemes which are on the picture, which we saw earlier, of actually making the crossings in London much more pedestrian friendly. This is one of the studies we did some time ago for Euston Road, and we're looking along the Euston Road as we speak on some of these crossings to make them more pedestrian friendly. So why don't we make the river more pedestrian friendly? The conventional high-level bridges in terms of connect motorways, making national and regional connections, and this is something which was picked up, I think, 10 years ago with Farrells. We did a kind of manifesto for London where we were saying, okay, there's big bridges and they're fantastic and they're really important. But the problem with them is because you have to cross the river in such a big way, you actually create quite a big chunks of infrastructure on either side, which makes it much more difficult to actually generate anything around it. If you see on the diagram on the screen, these big crossings which need to take off the bridge actually take a lot of land. So what we're saying is that the low-level bridges are for walking, cycling and public transport and connect communities at local level, because actually they don't take so much land on either side. And they can actually make transport more sustainable. I mean, the more people can, if you consider for a moment, if you're trying to go from, say, Charlton to here, you need to take a few modes of transport to actually come here. If there's a bridge across somewhere nearby, you can just walk or cycle, and this is what we are promoting effectively. But of course, it's not either or. We just need both, and there's two examples on the screen. What we're saying is that the low-level bridge is actually more affordable. As Karen, we work with some friend, some numbers, I'm sorry, and a low-level bridge could cost anything like 150 million, where a tunnel or a high-level bridge could be about 400 million pounds. So there's a kind of a cost order of three, we believe, in something like that. The reason the bridges are so expensive, because they sound more expensive than bridges on the other side of London, Tower Bridge, is because they have to open. The river is navigable, it's a working river, although much less so than 20, 30 years ago, so we need to actually make them a little bit more usable. It has to actually work in the river, not just be sitting there. So it's more challenging than some other parts of the world, and also it's more challenging in Newcastle, which is in the picture, because the river around the Thames barrier is about half a kilometre in width, where at Tower Bridge it's a quarter of a kilometre. So it kind of gets wider, and as you go further east, it gets even wider. So we're talking a kilometre of a bridge at some point if we go further east. So what we are actually saying is that connecting the north and south banks of the river will transform the economy. We think it's actually a key point in that. The moment you can start walking, I mean, we're talking about, say, 10-minute walk or 30-minute bus journey drive. Which one would you choose? And some of the earlier diagram, which I alluded to, the access to jobs, if you say on the northern part, on the southern part of the river, is much reduced to if you were living, say, in Newham, by putting a pedestrian bridge between, say, Newham and Greenwich. Then all of a sudden, you can access many more jobs, which brings connectivity, which brings regeneration potential, which actually makes the places much more desirable for people to live and work. And the key premise is exactly that one, that the more we can make places where people work and live and don't have to travel big distances, the better we are, in my opinion, actually redeveloping existing sites. And of course, it enables other housing and sustainable communities ideas to come to fruition. So a key aspect again is connectivity by foot or cycle. And so we are looking at 3 different areas of the Thames. There are different parts of where you can do all that. The Yellow Docks and Greenwich Peninsula, Royal Docks, Charlton, Woolwich, and Barking, Thamesmead. They'll have their different challenges. As I said, the river gets much wider downstream, so it becomes more of an engineering challenge, but of course it's something which can be easily overcome. But just again, in numbers, if we look at the bridges around connecting, say, Isle of Dogs and Greenwich, we are talking about between 110 and 270 million pounds, say, of investment in the bridge. However, that opens up additional housing capacity on the connecting the 2 sides, and also positively affecting the journey time reduction for about 20,000 people. So there is a great potential of doing something there which would actually help regenerate this particular area. The next one is the Royal Docks in Charlton, Woolwich, similar kind of order of cost depending on the type of bridge or how much open it needs to be and where it's located downstream, upstream from the Thames barrier. And again, there's this additional housing capacity which can be released if we connect people across, instead of housing capacity comparison is to if we do a road bridge. So that's where you have more land, so give you more houses. And again, people positively affected by journey time reduction could be up to 9,000 people. It's just based on looking at potential capacity on these sites, so this is how the numbers have been derived. And of course, 3, as we go further east, there's a fantastic way of I mean, I think the further we go east, the more it becomes separated to the north and south of the river, and a bridge further is even more kind of beneficial to the whole development of the area. We can create new waterfront communities, we can improve accessibility for existing and future communities. Probably going too quickly, my final slide is that in conclusion we're really saying that low-level crossings will support new waterfront communities. This kind of CGI you see there, if you can imagine a river where you can actually go across these areas, currently there's no way you can actually do that. And if we can actually encourage pedestrian and cycling connectivity, given that the order of cost is so much different, we believe there's a great, fantastic opportunity there, which can be tapped into any future developments. And we're trying to encourage boroughs and developers to start talking to each other, to start connecting the dots, because it actually, in the grand scheme of things, 150 million pound pedestrian bridge, which releases connectivity, which doesn't really reduce the peak hour rating, but it does allow you to walk 10 minutes to a DLR station as opposed to half an hour to Jubilee. The train station is hugely valuable to anyone, to people, to developers, to the local community, and obviously to London. So this is me, and thank you very much.